Welcome back to Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner. Columbia's downtown may soon become the home to yet another luxury housing development. A New York developer is considering plans to build a 24-story complex on the corner of 6th and Elm. The development echoes a trend being seen in many public university towns across the nation to create luxury housing for an affluent student population. But is this trend sustainable? Today on Intersection, we're taking a closer look at student housing in Columbia. In the first half of the show, we discussed how it's changing the college experience for students. Now in the second half, we'll talk about how it's changing Columbia. Joining me in studio today, Kristofor Husted is a reporter at KBIA who's been covering the developments downtown and their impact on students and the community. He's still with us from the first half hour, as is Frankie Miner, who's the director of residential life at MU and has been since the mid-1990s. But now we're also joined by Ian Thomas, a council member for Columbia's 4th Ward. Ian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
And joining us by phone, Brent Gardner is a realtor and chair of the Downtown Leadership Council in Columbia. Brent, thanks for calling in today.
No problem.
All right. And we'd love to hear from you and our audience today. What concerns do you have about the proposed development on 6th and Elm? Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. Ian, since you're our new guest here, I'll start with you.
Sure.
So what's your opinion first on this? We talked a little bit in the intro there, that 24-story proposal at where Bangles is now downtown. It's not yet a real formal proposal yet. I'm sure you'll talk about that. But what's your first reaction to that news?
Well, before jumping into that, I'd just like to say that I've been very supportive and pleased to see a large increase in the downtown residential population. I think that's good for Columbia. It makes our infrastructure work better. It reduces travel times. It creates a vibrant, economically active downtown business district, and that's really good for the city. As far as a 24-story building, we haven't had any formal proposal yet, although I understand that there is going to be a request for some kind of a development agreement coming to us at the next council meeting. Okay. We're in a kind of transitionary moment because I think everybody agrees that the land use zoning that exists for most of downtown, including this particular site, which is called C2, is not effectively achieving the goals that we want as a community right now. Mm-hmm. So there's a plan to revise that, and obviously that gets very touchy when people are in the middle of very large dollar transactions. So I understand that the developer is hoping for some kind of guarantees about the council being agreeable to a particular plan. I'm not sure how I feel about that, and we'll have to look at the specific proposal as it comes. I'm not anxious to rush into any quick decisions. I think a building that will actually be more than twice as tall as the next largest building in the downtown or in any of Columbia, maybe a little taller than we want from an aesthetic reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the main points, there are a lot of things that C2 zoning you mentioned that create issues for downtown, right? Because there's a lot of very lack of restrictions for height, and parking is one of the main things. There's other things as well. Of course, it has to be up to city codes, these buildings under that zoning. But on the parking issue, I'd like to hear from you and maybe Ian as well, or I'm sorry, Brent, if you'd like to join in as well. But Ian, what your thoughts are on that and what we may be seeing with the parking situation downtown?
Well, there's no question in my mind that as we continue to densify the downtown area, we've added, I think, about 1,200 students and a few hundred non-students in the last 3 years or so. Another 2,000 student beds are expected in the next few years. We cannot work on a kind of a transportation planning approach of cars for all adults. We have to diversify our transportation options. We really have to expand our bus system and make that work really well for students and for other community members, as well as maintaining safe and pleasant bicycle pedestrian options to move people around. So certainly, if we're going to get 700 new beds in this building, we're going to need some new parking. But I think where that number falls, the number of new parking spaces per new resident, that's going to be the critical question. And I would want to keep it lower rather than higher.
Right. And Brent, I wanted to get your thoughts, too, specifically on the parking issue.
Yeah, well, one comment similar to what Ian's is that more bodies downtown is good. So far, it seems like it's only been an increase in students. So I think it'd be healthy to have a combination of students as well as adults, professional, young professionals, or little families, if that would be great, if that would be possible. Many of these developers have kind of promised or said they were going to get mixed use in there as far as different types of residents, and I haven't seen any of that yet. And I think even the 24-story developers have said that they wanted a mixed use. I just haven't run into a lot of 30, 40-year-olds that want to live amongst students in the same complex. So that's just a point. Parking definitely is the issue, and I think as we go forward, it'll become more of an issue. I think the concept is that the more people that live downtown and have cars, and especially if they're in luxury units, they probably do have cars. They have to store them somewhere, and are they taking parking spaces from shoppers? So I think that's really the crux of the parking issue. And, I think that in the future, the developers will be using parking spaces as a way to lure students to their development, kind of the market working a little bit there. So the ones like Brookside, that at least early Brooksides, that don't have parking will probably start to take a hit or have to go down in their rents to battle the ones who will say, hey, for an extra $100, you can park your car here.
Right. And while we're still on the issue of parking, I did want to go to, we played earlier in the show some clips that Andrew Yost, one of our producers, went out and gathered while talking to some residents of Brookside. We have some now as well about talking to students at Brookside, talking about the parking situation living downtown. So we'll hear from them now.
Brookside does offer parking, but it's very minimal, and that was just like, there's just no way I could get a spot there. So aside from just, street parking and finding a spot in a garage, that's pretty much what all I've been able to do.
I know that if you sign early enough, Brookside has that parking lot across the street on Locust, and then there's the new parking garage that they built. But I actually park at Campus Lutheran Church with Beta Sig fraternity, so and the only day you can't park there is on Sundays, and then meters are free downtown on Sundays.
Relating to that parking aspect, there's no place for me to park downtown, so I park on East Campus. And today I found out my car was towed because they said it was abandoned on East Campus because I left it there for a week. That's something I never had to deal with, having my own driveway, and something I hope I don't have to deal with again.
So that was Matt Barham, Demi Yeager, and David Tressler we heard from there. We're at that point, though, right, where we've had some of these developments go in downtown where we have not had parking restrictions. So at this point, with these developers, Chris, actually, I know you've looked into this a little bit, reported on this a little bit, and maybe, Ian, you may know a little about this too, and Brent, but are these developers, especially the 24-story, are they talking about working with the city on parking even though they really don't have to by C2 zoning, correct?
As far as I know, they've talked about being flexible with parking and coming to an agreement that would be sufficient for both the city and for what they want to be able to produce.
Well, I think there's been quite a bit of talk, but my takeaway from those 3 interview clips, I was very disappointed that not a single one of those students mentioned the Fast Cat bus service, because when those Brookside apartments were built, Brookside Development actually pays the city a considerable amount of money every year to run the Fast Cat service and to advertise the apartments on those buses. And I've noticed that there's very few students, very few of anybody riding those buses. Don't quite understand why that is. Each of your interviewees had their own car and was really struggling and stressed with trying to manage that parking thing, one chap having it towed away, somebody else just having a difficult time finding somewhere to put it. I don't know how we get over this barrier, but we need to educate young people who are coming to Columbia about the alternative options. We need to improve those options at the same time. I think there's been some criticism of the route that the Fast Cat takes that might be valid, but let's have a community and university-wide conversation about how we can provide transportation services that are effective and that are, appropriate for the town that we're becoming.
Right.
I'd like to weigh in. Part of this is, again, somebody who's supported Ian for a number of years and is now motorized transport. I bike. A large part of my commuting around town is via bike. But I've also worked with students for a long time, particularly those in large Midwestern campuses. Very different, perhaps, in an urban city. They're just not users of public transportation. For most of them, the only bus they've ever ridden was yellow. Mm-hmm. And so when they come here, while they may be using alternative means to get to and from class, they're still looking at what are they going to use that vehicle for their other activities beyond that. And I think we can try to create as many incentives as we can for alternative transportation and that. But I think by and large, what you're going to see is those students bringing their cars, and as the one student lodge, parking it in East Campus. I live a few blocks from campus on the west side. Beginning at 6:30 in the morning, my street fills up until about 7 o'clock at night when it empties out, because those are people who are parking and then walking to campus from there. So like I said, I think it's good to create some incentives, but I think we also need to recognize that we've got to change a culture, and we're going to try to change a culture that doesn't want to change.
I want to bring in a comment from Kim, actually a couple comments. I'll just string them together because they're both very good. She says, where will the line on population downtown be drawn? The number of students and cars are driving away locals. My family love going downtown, but the parking in huge complexes are making it an unappealing place. She had another comment saying, we tried to go to Halloweeny Friday night and the garages were full. We had to park far away and walk in the dark. This is an event for kids and sponsored by downtown businesses. It's very sad to see our downtown disappear in all this madness. Ian?
Well, I don't think we're talking about our downtown disappearing. I think we're talking about a big transition, big cultural change. As Frankie said, it affects the students that are moving here, but it affects our local community as well. I don't think we should be thinking about drawing the line on population downtown. We're not very dense downtown compared to a lot of cities. Even with our 24-story proposed building coming in and 700 new students there, we're still not really all that dense. What we have to do is to lay on an equally accessible and usable, different modes of transportation. And the bus system is key to that. When the bus service reaches the point that it is about equal inconvenience for community members wanting to come downtown for an event like Halloweeny, or for students to get out to the mall to do some shopping, as it is to drive the car, then we'll see an appropriate balance developed.
Right. And Brent, I wanted your thoughts on Kim's comments there.
I got kicked off the
sorry about that.
off the air briefly, but I came back on. I think we've kind of, like Ian said, we were in a transition period of kind of going from a small town or medium-sized town into a small city, and the growing pains are, for us being a university town, students living downtown. So there is a perception amongst those that are living in subdivisions 10 miles out, 10 minutes away, 15, 20, that this is kind of becoming downtown as more of a student area. I'm curious why the university didn't consider building more dormitories. They have, obviously, the location. They've got land. It is an income stream for the university to have a dorm, I would think. And Frankie, I guess you could talk to that. But I'm sure the university knew before anyone else that this was going to happen with student growth, population-wise. Just curious why they allowed the private sector to take on the risk and the opportunity for these buildings.
Well, I can't speak for the university. I can only speak for my experience here, Brent. But again, the growth that we've seen at the institution was not entirely anticipated. We've been looking at a situation where the number of high school graduates from Missouri has actually been declining. What we experienced rather quickly was the growth in what was called non-resident or out-of-state students. That's really kind of offset that and helped us spur this growth. But the reality is the campus does not really have much more property. I naively suggested when I first came here there was that old cornfield on College Avenue, but was quickly made a rookie mistake with that. But in the situation that's why we're not really building much more, because we were scrambling to try to find where we could add residence halls on campus, on property that the campus owns. And you look at where those private developers are building, they're building on private property, not on university property.
Is there any concern, though, about, we've kind of teased it in the intro, about a bubble? Is that part of it, too? I mean, we talked a little bit about how much the ratios change, too, but I mean, is that part of it, too, that we may not need this housing stock someday, too?
If I could predict the future of 18-year-olds 10, 15 years in advance, I'd be in a different business. We don't know what our enrollment's going to be. I think we've enjoyed a lot of growth. I think there's a good reason to believe that we're going to have stable enrollment for some years, but how far we continue to grow is a large part of infrastructure questions. It's it's not just parking and residence hall space. It's classroom spaces. It's faculty. Do we have the rest of the infrastructure to grow there? So I do have some real legitimate concerns that we are overbuilding housing geared towards a particular market segment at a particular price point. I really think the wiser investors and developers will begin to diversify that. I know the Trittenbach, the Odell brothers, were looking at building less expensive housing out near Discovery Ridge. I understand that those plans may be being reconsidered now, but at least they were trying to build something further out so you don't have the convenience. But at a price point, if you're putting yourself through school or trying to do it economically, you need that kind of housing.
And I've certainly heard Nathan Odell say that he believes that the luxury student housing market is built now, and they are not building those kind of residences anymore.
Okay. I want to take a moment to remind our audience this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're talking about student housing in Columbia and how it's changing Columbia. Joining me in studio today, Kristofor Husted, a reporter at KBIA who's been covering the developments downtown and their impact on students and the community. Frankie Miner is the director of residential life at MU and has been since the mid-1990s. Ian Thomas is the council member for Columbia's 4th Ward, and joining us by phone, Brent Gardner is a realtor and the chair of the Downtown Leadership Council in Columbia. For the young professionals in our audience, would you live in a mixed housing development similar to the proposed one on 6th and Elm? Why or why not? Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. And I'll throw that question to our panel as well. We've talked about that getting a mix, and that's one of the proposals, or in this early reporting about this 24-story proposal, is that it would be for both students and young professionals. We've heard that before, too. So is that realistic?
Well, maybe we'll find out if somebody calls in right now. I thought that was a great question, Ryan, and I'd like to know the answer to that. I hope so. I hope that we can, build mixed use or mixed clientele type buildings that students and non-students can live in together. Listening to the first half of your program talking about the socioeconomic demographics and how the development boom has created a separation, that's very troubling, and it makes me wonder whether there's a way to encourage or require development to include affordable housing as part of the same building or the same development, as well as what I believe the developer at the Bengals site is doing of having some 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units in addition to the standard 4-bedroom units. I don't know the answer, but I hope we can diversify downtown, because I think as it moves more and more to a higher and higher percentage of students only and a very small percentage of anybody else, it's going to be less and less attractive for those other, young professionals or senior citizens or young families to want to live in the downtown area. But that's really what we want to encourage.
I think it's just economics that's causing the developments to come in at a higher end. They can make more money by making them higher end. The Niedermeyer building, which is on the corner of Cherry and 10th Street, that still exists. There was I guess it was sometime last year where the development was, developers from St. Louis were going to purchase the property and demolish it and build a 15-story building. That did not occur. Those folks have found another spot closer to campus and more appropriate, I think, in location. But the current owner of the Niedermeyer has pledged to make it and continue to make that building affordable. And it's unusual because downtown it's really tough to find affordable housing. I mean, I think his units are going for $400 or $500 per place, and they're 1-bedroom units. But it's tough. It's tough for even him to make it, and that's a remodeling situation there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we don't have any young professionals on the line yet, but we do have one at the table. I'm going to put Chris on the spot here. I'm going to put Chris on the spot here. I knew I was getting this question. But I'm going to put you on the spot because you've lived here for a little over a year now, and you want to live near downtown. Right. So what's your response to that question of, would you actually live in one of these places?
Short answer, no. I'm 30 years old. I don't really want to live with a 21-year-old who might be having parties or living this lavish lifestyle that I might deem too early or too premature for them to be able to afford. And that was part of the possible proposal that the 24-story building would have, half for students and half for young professionals. The other, and I live in Benton-Stevens, and I can speak, I guess, on behalf of some of my neighbors who are roughly around my age, plus or minus a few years, and they are not even excited about that Brookside that went in about a block or two away from where we live right now because of the parking situation. Because on the weekends and during the school days, our streets are lined with parking. So, as a young professional, trying to live downtown is something great. It's a great idea, but in theory, but including students into that wouldn't be ideal, I think.
Sure. Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, it is. There've been enormous changes downtown in the last few years, and I had the opportunity to do a ride along with a Columbia Police Department patrol officer, on a Friday night a few weeks ago, and around about 2:00 outside the corner where Harpo's is, it was quite a scene. And I wasn't a saint during my years in college, but it was not the sort of neighborhood that I think many people who are not students would want to live in and have that, loud late night activity going on outside their door. So I think there is a bit of a problem there. The problem that you mentioned, Chris, about the parking in the adjacent neighborhoods, North Village was the first one to really feel this, Benton Stevens, East Campus, and now even in my ward, off of Stewart Road. I think that the residential parking permit program is working well in the North Village and is coming to Benton Stevens and to the other neighborhoods pretty soon. I'm hopeful that will help to shift that balance between, as students are deciding whether to bring a car to college or not, or possibly to put it in some long-term storage that's further away from campus and from downtown, and essentially live car-free whilst they're here. I think that will help address that problem.
Yeah, I actually was a saint in college, but I don't think when I was in college I would want 30-year-olds plus living in the same area. I just don't think that's a match that either side wants. I really think that's just a sales pitch, to be frank, from the developer. It's been used by most of the developers downtown. If you look back and see where their initial conversations were, they were all talking about not just students. No, these aren't just student apartments. These are going to be for adults, professional adults and students both. But it never turns out that way. At least it hasn't yet. So I really think that's just a pitch.
The other end of this, though, is the company trying to put these places in. The developers, they've done their market research enough that they think that there's this market there for this type of consumer. So
I think there is a market for it. I just don't think it's in the same building.
Right.
I think there's a lot of.
Right,
I'm a realtor, and I have people come to me saying, "Hey, we'd love to have some condo. Is there a condo I can purchase downtown?" And there's really not.
Yeah, and I think as I've spoken to some of the local developers, that's what I encourage them towards is, don't go again towards that market segment that, why go try to take on the competition? Why not go for a market segment that's not being served? But again, and I'm far from being a young professional, but in working with even our graduate students, we talk to them about some mixed use opportunities to try to deal with some of theirs. There's just not an interest, and there's only a few years difference, and there's some students themselves. But yeah, I think the priorities are different, their lifestyles are different, and again, you look at Katy Place Apartments. That was a very proximate. One of the older developments were very proximate to campus, relatively so, and they do not allow undergraduates there, and that's because they're going for a very different market segment that's very convenient for a lot of other reasons, to the trail, to shopping, and so on. But I think if they started letting undergraduates in there, they'd see an exodus from their property as well.
I do want to bring in a question rather, from one of our guests. It was for you, Ian, actually. He said, we are not too dense in our population. What are the numbers? When would you see it as too dense downtown?
Well, I'm basing that on the fact that there are very, very few buildings taller than 2 or 3 stories downtown. And you go to even other college towns in the Midwest, and you see more, 5, 6, 7, 8-story buildings. I don't know. I certainly can't give a number on this, but I am certain that we would the stress of the transportation issues downtown would be alleviated if we could get that balance of different modes functioning really well.
Okay. We may have snagged ourselves a young professional. I think we have one on the line. I'm going to get to her. We only have a few minutes left in the show. Miriam from Columbia, I think, is called in. Miriam, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Great. Thanks for calling in. We appreciate it.
Yes. So thinking about moving downtown, one of the major things that would have to be in place would be an infrastructure to support going anywhere in the town, say on 10-minute intervals. And I'm not sure that we even have that in place right now. Another thing would be maybe parking underneath the building versus looking toward extra parking garages or other lots. Start putting things as vertical as we possibly could.
Thanks, Miriam. We're going to have to let you go because the technical issues are pretty difficult right now, so I'll have to let you go. But thanks for calling out. We were able to get what you said there, I think.
Yeah.
Basically, that she wanted to see better options on transportation. I know you've been talking about that, Ian, as we've been going here, 10-minute intervals where she, you're going to be picked up somewhere wherever she's living downtown. I mean, how far away are we from something like that?
Well, the city transit department has made a new proposal, a complete revision of the current bus system. It's called Como Connect, and public forums are in progress right now. Each council member is hosting one. There are going to be 3 or 4 more of these in the next month. And I'd encourage everybody who's interested in the future of transportation in Columbia to attend one of those forums. It will reallocate our existing bus resources and our operating budget much more effectively. It'll do away with the looping routes that all come back to Wabash. There'll still be 2 major connector routes that'll come through the downtown campus area, but the buses will be deployed more in the neighborhoods, the business districts, the shopping districts, and so on around town, so that you really can get from downtown out to a specific location and back, or vice versa, a lot more easily.
Okay. We got another comment saying, Ian, he says you're living in a fantasy world. That's just because people his and my age think that bicycles and buses are great. College students do not. This is not the Bay Area or Washington, D.C. MU students aren't going to give up their cars.
Well, it may not be the Bay Area or Washington, D.C., but I think it is quite similar to Champaign-Urbana in Illinois, to Ames, Iowa, where bus investment, public investment in the bus system is about 3, 4, or 5 times what we have here in Columbia, and ridership is 3, 4, or 5 times as high.
Right. So what could we put into place that might incentivize that? I
Well,
guess?
it would certainly help if the university and the Missouri Students Association would take a really close look at the idea of improving the bus service, how that will affect students, how that will affect the university, faculty, and staff as well, in terms of quality of life, of mobility, of long-term infrastructure costs, of personal infrastructure costs. Because the evidence from some of these other similar, in other respects, Midwest college towns is that a student fee supporting a bus system and students traveling free everywhere throughout the city works really well.
Mm-hmm. And I know, Frankie, you can't talk for the entire university,
Right.
but what are the conversations you're hearing about this on campus too? I guess.
Well, we're trying. We have to work in concert with the city very much, and I think again the amount of bus traffic that has increased on campus has been significant. Try to go to the center part of campus at any time between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. There's at least 7 or 8 buses that are lined up there. So as the apartment complexes have developed, they've either contracted with the city or providing their own. So we're starting to see more bus traffic, but again, that's getting students from one place, their residents, to their to another place they want to go, campus. It's not giving them the lifestyle choices to go to the theater, the shopping center, all the other things that they want to do. So until we can tip that point, students, I think, like the person, they're going to want to have their cars. I'm a big bike enthusiast, but yeah, there's not a lot of folks out there like me.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop it there. That's all the time we have for today's Intersection. Thanks very much to our guests, KBIA reporter Kristofor Husted, Frankie Miner, the Director of Residential Life at MU, Ian Thomas, the Council Member for Columbia's 4th Ward, and Brent Gardner, a Realtor and Chair of the Downtown Leadership Council in Columbia, who joined us by phone. We'd like to remind those of you enjoying this as a rebroadcast that Intersection takes place live for a full hour from 2 to 3 every Monday afternoon. You can watch live streaming video of our program each Monday afternoon online at kbia.org. Alongside that video, you can submit your questions and comments and take part in an online discussion with others in the audience. You'll also find an archive of all of our past programs, including the full hour of today's conversation. Intersection's a broadcast from the Reynolds Journalism Institute and is a project of RJI and KBIA. Intersection's produced by Raymond Tungakar, Janet Saidi, and Ruben Stern. Travis McMillan's our technical director, with production assistance from Caleb Hoke, Casey Morrell, and Andrew Yost. Pat Akers is our audio producer. Executive directors are Mike Dunn and Mike McKean. I'm Ryan Famuliner. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great week.